Princess Elena stood by her bedroom window, watching the busy courtyard below. At 15 years old, she had spent her entire life inside the golden walls of the royal palace. Her father, King Marcus, ruled the kingdom with an iron fist. He believed that keeping his daughter locked away would protect her from the dangerous world outside. Elena pressed her face against the cold glass. She could see merchants selling colorful fruits in the market square beyond the palace gates. Children her age laughed and played in the streets. Their freedom made her heart ache with longing. She had never stepped foot outside the palace walls. She had never felt grass beneath her feet or breathed air that wasn't filtered through stone corridors. The princess had tried many times to convince her father to let her explore the kingdom. Each time he would shake his head firmly. "The world is full of bad people who would hurt you," he would say. "You are safe here. That is all that matters." But Elena didn't feel safe. She felt like a bird trapped in a beautiful cage. Her only connection to the outside world came through books and the stories told by palace servants. They spoke of festivals where people danced under the stars, of rivers where families would swim on hot summer days, and of mountains where brave souls would climb to touch the clouds. These tales filled Elena with wonder and made her desperate to experience life beyond her golden prison. Elena had noticed that one particular guard always stood at the main gate. His name was Thomas, and he was different from the other guards. While they stood rigid and emotionless, Thomas would sometimes smile at the children who pressed their faces against the palace gates. She had seen him slip small pieces of bread to hungry beggars when he thought no one was looking. His kindness gave her hope that maybe, just maybe, he might understand her situation. The young princess had been planning something for weeks. She knew the palace rules by heart. Guards were forbidden from helping prisoners escape, even royal ones. They could lose their jobs or face serious punishment for disobeying the king's orders. But Elena was desperate. She couldn't spend another day trapped in her beautiful prison. She needed someone brave enough to risk everything to help her taste freedom, even if it was just for a few hours. As the sun began to set, Elena made her decision. Tonight she would send Thomas a message that could change both of their lives forever. She didn't know if he would help her, but she had to try. The alternative was spending the rest of her youth watching life happen from behind palace windows. Her heart pounded with excitement and fear as she began to write the most important letter of her young life. Elena sat at her wooden desk as moonlight streamed through her window. She had waited until the palace grew quiet and most of the servants had gone to sleep. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her quill pen. This message had to be perfect. It needed to convince Thomas to help her without putting him in immediate danger. She couldn't simply write, "Please help me escape." Such a direct message would be too risky if it fell into the wrong hands. Instead, Elena decided to hide her real meaning inside what looked like an innocent note. She had learned about secret codes from one of her tutors who had taught her about ancient methods of hidden communication. Elena began to write carefully. On the surface, her message appeared to be a simple thank you note to the palace guards for their service. She wrote about how grateful she was for their protection and how much she appreciated their dedication, but hidden within the innocent words was her real message. She used the first letter of each sentence to spell out her true request. The hidden message read, "Help me see the world outside these walls tonight. I will be at the garden gate at midnight. Please don't let fear stop you from showing kindness to someone who has never known freedom. I promise no harm will come to you." After finishing the letter, Elena read it several times to make sure both the surface message and the hidden one made sense. She folded the paper carefully and sealed it with a drop of candle wax. Now came the hardest part, getting the message to Thomas without anyone else seeing it. Elena had befriended a young kitchen maid named Sarah, who was only a few years older than herself. Sarah had always been kind to the lonely princess, often bringing her extra sweets from the kitchen and listening to her complaints about palace life. More importantly, Sarah had access to all parts of the palace, including the guard quarters. The next morning, Elena waited until Sarah brought her breakfast. When they were alone, Elena pulled out the sealed letter. "Sarah, I need you to do something very important for me," she whispered. "I need you to give this letter to Thomas, the guard at the main gate. But you must make sure no one else sees you do it." Sarah looked worried. She knew that delivering secret messages could get her in serious trouble. "Princess, what if someone catches me?" "What if the king finds out?" she asked nervously. Elena took Sarah's hands in hers. "I know I'm asking a lot, but I'm desperate. I've never hurt anyone, yet I'm treated like a prisoner. This letter might be my only chance at experiencing real life. Please, Sarah. You're my only friend in this whole palace." Sarah could see the desperation in Elena's eyes. She had watched the princess grow sadder each day, staring out windows with longing. Finally, she nodded. "I'll do it, but you must promise me that whatever you're planning won't hurt anyone." Elena hugged her friend tightly. "I promise. I just want to see what lies beyond these walls. I want to feel like a normal person for just one night." Sarah hid the letter in her apron and went about her daily duties. She waited for the right moment when Thomas was alone at his post. As she walked past the gate carrying a basket of vegetables from the market, she pretended to trip. The letter fell from her apron near Thomas's feet as she gathered the scattered vegetables. Thomas helped her collect the vegetables, and Sarah quietly whispered, "The princess asked me to give this to you. Please read it when you're alone." Then she hurried away, her heart pounding with nervous energy. Thomas looked at the sealed letter in his hand, wondering what message could be so important that it required such secrecy. Thomas waited until his shift ended before opening Elena's letter. He went to his small quarters behind the guardhouse and lit a candle. As he read the surface message thanking the guards for their service, he felt confused. Why would the princess need to send such a message in secret? Then he noticed something strange about the way the sentences were written. Being a former soldier who had served in wars, Thomas knew about hidden messages. He had used them himself to send information across enemy lines. As he examined the first letter of each sentence, his eyes widened in shock. The hidden message became clear, and he realized the princess was asking him to help her escape the palace. Thomas set the letter down and rubbed his forehead. This was exactly the kind of situation he had hoped to avoid. He had taken the job as a palace guard because it seemed simple and safe. Stand at the gate, check visitors, and keep unwanted people out. Now he was being asked to risk everything to help the king's daughter break the rules. He thought about his own life. Thomas had grown up poor in a small village. His parents had died when he was young, and he had joined the army to survive. After years of fighting in brutal wars, he had seen enough violence and death to last a lifetime. The palace job offered him peace and steady pay. If he helped Elena escape even for one night and they were caught, he would lose everything. The king might even have him executed for treason, but as Thomas reread the letter, he couldn't ignore the desperation in Elena's hidden words. He had been watching the princess for months from his position at the gate. He had seen her standing at her window, looking out with such sadness that it made his heart ache. She reminded him of his younger sister, who had died during the war. His sister had always dreamed of seeing the ocean, but she died before she ever got the chance. Thomas knew what it felt like to be trapped. During his time as a prisoner of war, he had spent 3 months locked in a small cell. The walls had felt like they were closing in on him every day. He remembered the overwhelming joy he felt when he was finally freed. Could he really deny that same feeling of freedom to someone who had never experienced it? The guard walked to his small window and looked out at the palace garden. He could see Elena's window glowing with candlelight. She was probably sitting there right now, wondering if he would help her or report her to the king. Thomas realized that he was the only person in the entire kingdom who had the power to grant her wish. He thought about the other guards he worked with. Most of them blindly followed orders without questioning whether those orders were right or wrong. They would never risk their jobs to help someone, even if that person was suffering. But Thomas had learned during the war that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. As midnight approached, Thomas made his decision. He couldn't stand by and watch an innocent young woman waste away in a golden prison. She wasn't asking him to help her escape forever. She just wanted one night to feel like a normal person. How could he deny her that basic human experience? Thomas put on his darkest cloak and checked that his keys were secure. He knew the palace layout better than almost anyone. If they were careful and quiet, he could show Elena a small part of the world beyond the walls and bring her back before dawn. The risk was enormous, but his conscience wouldn't let him ignore her plea for help. He looked at Elena's letter one more time, then carefully burned it in the candle flame. There would be no evidence of their plan. Either they would succeed and return safely, or they would be caught and face the consequences together. Thomas tucked his sword into his belt and prepared to break the most important rule of his career. Elena had barely slept all day. As midnight approached, she put on her darkest dress and wrapped a plain brown cloak around her shoulders. She had never owned common clothes, so she hoped her disguise would be enough to help her blend in with regular people. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure the entire palace could hear it. She crept through the dark hallways, careful to avoid the spots where the floorboards creaked. Elena had spent years memorizing every sound the palace made. She knew which stairs to skip and which doors opened silently. The garden gate was on the far side of the palace, away from the main guard posts. When Elena reached the garden, she hid behind a large rose bush and waited. The night air felt different than the air inside the palace. It carried scents of wildflowers and distant campfires that made her feel dizzy with excitement. She had never breathed air that hadn't been filtered through stone walls and glass windows. Minutes felt like hours as Elena waited in the shadows. What if Thomas had decided not to come? What if he had reported her message to the king? Her mind raced with terrible possibilities. Just as she was about to give up hope, she heard soft footsteps approaching the garden gate. Thomas appeared like a shadow, moving silently across the garden. He looked around carefully before approaching Elena's hiding spot. "Princess," he whispered. "Are you sure you want to do this? Once we leave the palace, there's no turning back until dawn." Elena stepped out from behind the roses. Even in the moonlight, Thomas could see the determination in her young face. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she replied quietly. "I need to see what the world looks like beyond these walls." Thomas nodded and pulled out a set of keys. He had borrowed them from the keymaster's office, making sure to choose ones that wouldn't be missed until morning. The garden gate opened, with a soft click that sounded as loud as thunder to both of them. They froze, listening for any signs that someone had heard them. When they were sure the coast was clear, Thomas led Elena through the gate and into the world beyond. The princess took her first step on ground that wasn't part of the royal palace. The dirt beneath her feet felt different, more real somehow. She knelt down and picked up a handful of earth, letting it run between her fingers like precious jewels. Thomas watched Elena's wonder with a mixture of joy and nervousness. He knew they needed to move quickly, but he didn't want to rush this moment for her. "Stay close to me," he whispered. "We'll visit the market square first, then I'll show you the river before we return." They walked through the sleeping village streets. Elena marveled at the simple houses where normal families lived their lives. She saw laundry hanging on lines, small gardens filled with vegetables, and cats prowling through the shadows. Everything seemed magical to someone who had only seen life from a palace window. The market square was empty, except for a few night vendors selling late dinners to travelers. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread made Elena's stomach growl. At the palace, her meals were always served on golden plates in a formal dining room. Here, people sat on wooden benches and ate with their hands, laughing and talking freely. Thomas bought Elena a small meat pie from a vendor who didn't recognize either of them in the dim light. It was the first meal Elena had ever eaten that wasn't prepared by royal cooks. The simple food tasted better than any feast she had ever enjoyed at the palace. "This is incredible," Elena whispered to Thomas as they sat on a bench watching the night vendors. "These people seem so happy. They have so little compared to what I have at the palace, but they smile more than anyone I've ever seen." Thomas smiled sadly. "Sometimes having everything means having nothing at all," he replied. "These people work hard for what they have, so they appreciate it more." As they prepared to leave the market square, Elena heard something that made her freeze. Horse hooves were approaching fast, and she could see torches in the distance. Someone was coming, and they were coming quickly. Thomas grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her into the shadows between two buildings. The sound of horses grew louder, and they could hear men shouting orders. Through a crack in the wooden wall, they watched as a group of royal guards rode into the market square. Their leader was Captain Morrison, the head of palace security and Thomas's direct supervisor. "Search every building," Captain Morrison commanded his men. "The princess is missing from her room, and the garden gate was found unlocked. Someone helped her escape, and I want them both found before sunrise." Elena's face went pale with fear. Someone had discovered her absence much sooner than expected. Perhaps a servant had checked on her during the night. Or maybe a guard had noticed the unlocked gate during his rounds. Either way, their carefully planned escape was now a desperate flight from capture. Thomas knew they couldn't return to the palace now. The guards would be watching every entrance, and anyone caught helping Elena would face severe punishment. Their only option was to keep moving and hope they could find a safe place to hide until morning, when they might have a chance to sneak back undetected. "This way," Thomas whispered, leading Elena away from the market square through narrow alleyways. He knew these streets from his childhood, before he joined the army. There were hidden paths and abandoned buildings where they could take shelter. Behind them, they could hear the guards searching houses and questioning the night vendors. The vendors, loyal to their community, claimed they hadn't seen anything unusual. But Elena knew it was only a matter of time before someone remembered the young woman and the guard who had bought food earlier. They reached the edge of the village where the buildings gave way to farmland and forest. Thomas paused to consider their options. The forest would provide good hiding places, but it was also dangerous at night. Wild animals roamed there, and it would be easy to get lost in the darkness. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant for you to get in this much trouble. Maybe I should go back and tell them I forced you to help me." Thomas shook his head firmly. "We're in this together now, Princess. Besides, running back won't solve anything. They already know someone helped you, and I'm the most likely suspect." He looked back toward the village, where torchlight flickered between the buildings. "We need to keep moving." They entered the forest, following a narrow path that Thomas remembered from hunting trips years ago. The trees blocked out most of the moonlight, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Strange sounds echoed through the woods, owls hooting, branches creaking, and small animals rustling through the underbrush. Elena had never been in a wild place like this. At the palace, even the gardens were carefully maintained and perfectly safe. Here, every shadow could hide danger, and every sound made her jump. But despite her fear, she felt more alive than she ever had before. This was real adventure, not the sanitized stories she read in books. After walking for what felt like hours, they came to a small clearing where an old hunting cabin stood abandoned. Thomas checked inside and found it empty but still sturdy. "We can rest here until dawn," he said. "Then we'll figure out how to get you back to the palace safely." As they settled into the cabin, Elena realized that her one night of freedom had become something much bigger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. But looking at Thomas, who had risked everything to help a lonely princess experience the world, she knew she would never regret asking for his help. Outside, they could still hear the distant sounds of the search party moving through the village. Time was running out, and they both knew that their adventure was far from over. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the cabin windows, Elena and Thomas knew they couldn't hide forever. They had spent the night talking quietly about their lives, their dreams, and their fears. Elena learned that Thomas had lost his entire family during the war, and had spent years feeling as trapped by his past, as she felt trapped by her palace walls. "I need to go back," Elena said as she watched the sun rise through a crack in the wooden wall. "If I stay missing, you'll be blamed for kidnapping me. I won't let you suffer for my desire to see the world." Thomas had been thinking the same thing. He knew that every hour Elena remained missing made his situation worse. But he also knew that simply returning her to the palace wouldn't solve everything. The king would want to know how she escaped and who helped her. "There might be another way," Thomas said slowly. "But it would require you to be very brave, and it might not work." Elena turned to face him, her eyes bright with curiosity. "What do you mean?" "We could tell the truth," Thomas explained. "Not the whole truth, but enough of it. We could say that you escaped on your own, and I found you in the village and brought you back safely. If we stick to that story, they might believe it." Elena considered this plan. It would mean lying to her father, something she had never done before. But it might also save Thomas from punishment and show her father that she was capable of taking care of herself in the outside world. They made their way back toward the village as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The search parties had moved on, but they could see guards still posted at various locations throughout the town. Thomas led Elena to a spot near the main road where she could wait while he approached the guards alone. "Remember," Thomas said before leaving her, "you escaped on your own through a window, wandered through the village, got scared, and hid in the forest. I found you there this morning during my search and brought you back. Can you remember that story?" Elena nodded, her heart pounding with nervous energy. "Thomas, what if they don't believe us? What if my father has you punished anyway?" Thomas smiled sadly. Then at least I'll know I helped someone experience freedom, even if it was just for one night. That's worth any punishment. Thomas walked toward the main road and found Captain Morrison coordinating search teams. "Captain," he called out. "I found her. The princess is safe." Captain Morrison spun around, relief and anger fighting for control of his expression. "Where is she? Is she hurt?" "She's hiding in the forest, scared and ashamed," Thomas replied. "She managed to escape through her bedroom window and wandered into the village. When she realized how much trouble she was in, she ran into the woods. I found her about an hour ago." The captain gathered his men and followed Thomas to where Elena was waiting. When they found her, she was sitting on a fallen log looking exactly like a frightened young woman who had spent the night alone in the wilderness. Her dress was dirty, her hair was tangled, and she had scratches on her arms from walking through the forest. "Princess Elena," Captain Morrison exclaimed. "Thank goodness you're safe. Your father has been worried sick about you." Elena looked up with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I just wanted to see what was outside the palace. I didn't mean to cause so much trouble." The captain helped Elena to her feet and wrapped a cloak around her shoulders. "Let's get you home, princess. Your father will want to see that you're safe." As they rode back to the palace, Elena caught Thomas's eye. He gave her a small nod, and she knew that their secret was safe. They had shared one night of freedom and adventure that neither of them would ever forget. But Elena also realized that this experience had changed her forever. She had tasted real life, made a true friend, and discovered that she was braver than she had ever imagined. The palace walls would never feel quite the same again. King Marcus was waiting in the throne room when Elena returned to the palace. His face showed a mixture of relief, anger, and confusion. He had spent the entire night pacing the floors, imagining all the terrible things that could have happened to his precious daughter in the dangerous world outside. "Elena," he said, his voice shaking with emotion, "how could you do something so reckless? You could have been killed, kidnapped, or worse. I've spent your entire life protecting you from the world, and you threw it all away for one foolish adventure." Elena stood before her father, no longer the same sheltered princess who had climbed out her window the night before. She had seen how real people lived, faced real danger, and discovered inner strength she never knew she possessed. "Father, I understand that you were trying to protect me, but I can't live my entire life in fear of what might happen." The king looked at his daughter more carefully. Something had changed in her eyes. The sad, hopeless look he had grown accustomed to seeing was gone, replaced by a confidence and maturity that hadn't been there before. "I need to know how you escaped," the king said. "The guards reported that the garden gate was unlocked, but you claim you left through your window. Someone must have helped you." Elena took a deep breath, knowing that this moment would determine Thomas's fate. "Father, I did leave through my window. I have been planning this for weeks, watching the guards' routines and learning when they would be distracted. The garden gate must have been left unlocked by mistake." Captain Morrison stepped forward. "Your Majesty, I have questioned all the guards extensively. They all deny helping the princess, and their stories are consistent. It's possible she managed this escape entirely on her own." King Marcus studied his daughter's face, looking for any sign of deception. Elena met his gaze steadily, drawing on the courage she had discovered during her night of freedom. After a long moment, the king sighed deeply. "From now on, you will have additional guards watching your room at all times," he declared. "And your window will be sealed shut. I won't allow this to happen again." But even as he spoke these words, King Marcus could see that something fundamental had changed in his daughter. The broken spirit he had been trying to protect was gone, replaced by someone who would not be easily contained again. Over the following weeks, Elena surprised everyone in the palace with her transformation. Instead of moping by her window, she began taking an active interest in the kingdom's affairs. She asked to sit in on council meetings, requested tutors to teach her about economics and diplomacy, and started writing letters to other royal families. Thomas continued his duties as a palace guard, but he noticed that Elena would sometimes catch his eye during his rounds and give him a small secret smile. They never spoke about their adventure, but both of them treasured the memory of that one night when a lonely princess and a kind guard had defied the rules to experience true freedom. The king gradually began to see that his daughter had developed wisdom and maturity that couldn't be taught in a classroom or learned from books. Against his better judgment, he started allowing Elena to accompany him on short trips to nearby villages. She insisted on speaking directly with common people, learning about their lives and challenges. Elena never forgot the lessons she learned during her escape. She remembered the happiness she saw in the faces of people who had very little, the kindness of strangers who helped each other without expecting rewards, and the courage it took to do the right thing even when it was dangerous. Years later, when Elena became queen, she ruled with a wisdom and compassion that her people had never experienced before. She opened the palace doors to common citizens, created programs to help the poor, and made sure that no one in her kingdom would ever feel as trapped and isolated as she once had. Thomas eventually became the captain of the royal guard, and he never forgot the night when he chose to help a desperate princess find her freedom. The risk he took changed both of their lives forever, proving that sometimes the most important rules to break are the ones that keep us from showing kindness to others. Elena kept the memory of that magical night close to her heart, remembering that real freedom isn't about escaping from walls, but about having the courage to live according to your own values and to help others find their own paths to happiness.